Thanks, babe.
Afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our March 2023 ad hoc meeting, ad hoc attendance boundaries committee meeting. We are sorry for the delay. We're just now getting situated. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. I am joined today by my colleague, Board Member Bolton. And we've got some community members in place. If you did not get an agenda, please feel free to pick up an agenda and our work plan and our data point. Okay, so I'm just letting everybody get situated here. So we are waiting on one board member to come, and she'll join us just momentarily. Until then, Board Member Bolton, did you want to say anything before we officially start? Dive into the work?
Dive into the work.
She's ready to go. Okay, so let's go over very briefly our work plan. If you don't have a copy of it, it's up here. Rob, do you have a copy? Okay, thank you so much. Just for those that are just joining us for the first time in this large studio audience that we have, and Board Member Bolton, let me know if you think that there's anything that needs to be added or adjusted. But our overarching goal is, or the purpose of this ad hoc committee is to meet as needed in order to complete the assignment, and we will sunset after we finished with that. But the goal is to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for our elementary schools. And we are also charged with assessing the current state of the boundary lines and to make recommendations in collaboration with the board and the community to the full board. Anything to add, Board Member Bolton?
I would only add that it probably needs a sentence that says something about the upon the review, the resulting continuing questions and need for solution, because we do spend almost half the time each time we're here talking not just about the elementary boundaries, but what that would impact or how that changes. So I think just a very open-ended catch-all kind of sentence, I think, would help with that.
What was your suggestion? I said I have upon review, continuing discussions
of the resulting considerations and questions that need to be resolved and answered.
Okay.
Something like that.
All right. Ms. Phyllis, did you get that? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to quickly go through it. Actually, I don't need to go through anything. You can see it on the screen. Does anyone in the community, hey, Jen, have anything to add? I'll just read them since we're all here. Our charge is to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools. It's also to assess the current state of the boundary lines and make recommendations, develop a framework for public engagement in board processes to improve transparency, and to develop and monitor an annual work plan for ensuring board policy processes. So far, I think that's it. Let's go around and introduce ourselves to see who is in the room, and I'll start with my colleague.
Thank you. Would that sentence that we just talked about, would that be like a number 5 or?
I think it should be.
Okay. I somewhere.
Yeah, I was wondering if, yes, let's add that as a number 5. Okay. So Ms. Phyllis will add that as a number 5. I wrote it down, but just in case you have it too.
Thank you. Eve Bolton, board member.
Trouble number 2.
Chair Gibbs, Mount Auburn, Dr. Elementary, LSJC. I want to talk about the impact of these boundaries in this, all like transportation and children's mental health.
Ooh.
The play with your next door neighbor who happens to be your classmate.
Just a 6.
As an ad hoc, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's part of the results of this. But yeah, you're probably right to expand it from beyond geography or high schools of choice, but the impact on families and students and neighborhoods. So maybe that's we can kind of take care of that. I think it's a good.
That's a very
suggestion.
good-
Is that, we good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Everybody
I,
in this room is a troublemaker. They would not be in the ad hoc committee. And the biggest one is the treasurer.
yeah, I'm in a room full of trouble. So let me just reiterate for number. I actually added that to number 1. The board's charge is to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools and the impact on families and students. Do you want to say something about maybe mental health specifically, or just leave it
I
broad?
think there's a lot of different impacts.
Okay, I got it. All right, Ms. Phyllis. Next,
Jeremy Gallagher, Chief Information Officer.
and he is the king of the maps.
Our
King of the
map
maps.
Vespucci. America's Vespucci. That's your new nickname.
I'll take it.
That's right.
Got it. Yes, ma'am.
Britt Gordon, Silverton Village Council. Avalon Hall Community Learning Center Institute. Aaron Fay, parent of a 8th grader at Lawrence.
Allison Goodman, parent of 3 students, 1 at SCPA, 2 at Pleasant Ridge Montessori. Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer. I apologize for being late. We're the unions and the superintendent's still there, so she'll be over when she gets in.
She told us she was going to join us after Jeremy, so we got you covered. All right. And I'm Kareem Moffitt, chair of this ad hoc attendance boundary committee. Do you know if our chairman's coming? Okay. So does anyone, before we move on, have any other additions to the work plan? Any other thoughts? Okay. So, Jeremy, I think we're going to dive into you because you are the man with the maps and the man with the plan, literally and figuratively. So let's dive in. What do you have for us?
Sounds good. If you'll indulge me, I think a good place to start would be with the packet that each of the members have. I'm Rob. I'm having a few display issues. If you could pull up the PowerPoint. So as some of the community members have seen in the past, we have a school profile that we've put together that shows a little bit of information around, or a lot of information around each of our schools. That has been updated significantly with our latest version that is available online in board docs. Each of the members have. Limited extras, but feel free to share.
You cannot take those, guys. You gotta.
Yeah, please. They're bound and nice and stuff. No. So inside of that, I think there is a large amount of information to go through today and talk about what's been updated, as well as how it really addresses virtually all of the agenda items that we have that we want to talk about today inside of the packet, but they're in different places, right?
Okay.
So if we want to start looking through there is a table of contents on page 2. It has grown to the point of needing a table of contents. So the first thing it's something that has been discussed, at length in some of these committee meetings is around enrollment and trends. So we wanted to look at on page 3, you'll see the enrollment trend for the district as a whole, starting in 2002, 2003. I believe, Jen, that might have been when you started it.
You're right.
Yep. and now it goes all the way through the current. So we have a pretty good long trend of seeing what our overall district enrollment is. Jumping ahead a little bit towards the back, we also do have the individual school profiles. And if you look at any of those individual profiles, you can see the enrollment trend for each of the schools on a 3-year cycle. The top chart has 3 years from Q1 and Q4 of each year. So that enrollment trends broke down to the beginning of the year, what we started with, and what we end with.
Okay.
And so you can kind of just grab any of the random ones in the back, and you'll see towards the back. That's the bulk of the packet. But that'll show you the 3-year enrollment trend of that specific school, followed by the 1-year enrollment trend of the same school. So you can see a little bit more breakdown in quarter 1, quarter 2, 3, and 4. So you can see just in the previous year, from start to finish, where we hit highs and lows throughout the year. So So you can see a very detailed view of what the trend at each school looks like, as well as that initial. So following that, flipping back to the front on page 4 is the district demographic trends for the past 5 years. So you can see the growth and the change from last year over the previous year, as well as what the percentages were for each year from starting the 18-19. And then again, on the individual school sheets in the back, you'll notice there is a section that has the ethnicity and additional demographics broke down for each school. So it shows both the percentage of each school that from the ethnicity, as well as the ESL population, IEPs, economically disadvantaged, homeless, and our KISSER or foster parent kids. If I get that out. Then we get into the maps. All right, so we'll start with the corridor discussion that we had last time.
Yes.
You can see we have the same maps in the room, but we do have some updates. Then on the far side, we have what are our proposed lines, our starting lines, right, for what the corridors could look like between a west, central, and east. On this side, we have the additional maps that give you the detailed view of what each of the attendance boundaries that would comprise each of those corridors. Starting at the end is the west. Some of the additions that we have made over last time to offer a more clear picture that you look at. In the naming of the schools, you'll see they're color-coded, that the color coding is relevant to where they are designated today, whether they're a west side or an east side magnet, for example, or if they're a district-wide school. Purple is the west side, blue is the east side, and the yellow or orangish color is district-wide enrollment. And then we also had the enrollment. We've added the capacity as well as the current utilization. The current utilization breaks down. The red numbers indicate if the school's capacity is at 90% or higher. So those schools are either getting close or have surpassed what their current rated capacity is based on our FMP numbers that we have. Green indicates the school is at 60% or less of their capacity. We've added that data to each of these map views to make it a little bit easier to grasp what is happening in each of the corridors. In our packet, on the next page of page 6, we have a breakdown of just the counts by both the academic system, whether it's a Montessori, an international, whether it has an entrance qualification, or if it's one of the other magnet systems, the remaining magnet systems from there. So you can see what the count of each of those are within the corridors, as well as the grade bands. So the number of pre-K through 6, the number of pre-K through 8 that would exist based on the current layout that we have, the number of each of those within the corridors. All right, so skipping ahead to page 10, and I think this starts getting much further into some of the analysis we've talked about, especially that Ms. Gibbs even brought up in terms of some of the impacts. As we've been working through some of the considerations and discussions on what would impacts be if we made changes, right? So this starts getting into some of those discussions around some of the hot spots we've talked about. The first one is Pleasant Hills and Winton Hills. We know that there are areas around Winton Hills that there's been a lot of discussion around, those kids being bused to Pleasant Hill or somewhere else versus going to Winton Hills, which is within their actual walking distance. So what you can see in this breakdown of this impact on the map, the green area, that is the walking boundary for Winton Hills. So all the kids we're talking about, both in the Garden View, Garden Hill area above Winton Hills and the Winton Terrace to below Winton Hills, their attendance boundary, are all within the walking distance of Winton Hills. So what between the two of those areas, there's approximately 228 kids that we're talking about that are currently going to Pleasant Hill as opposed to Winton Hill. Looking at that number, you can see in the chart there that what the enrollment is and the capacity. So here's one of the things that we would have to look at. The capacity at Winton Hills is already at 80% roughly. That means they have 93 seats available. So it would not be possible for us to just say, okay, we want to change these attendance boundaries to where all 220 plus of those kids, we're going to now go to Winton Hills. They don't have the capacity to take on that number of kids. So we would have to determine a criteria of how we want to, or which areas, which street, like there would have to be some criteria defined as to how we wanted to change that. Also, and I apologize, I had a little bit of a layout issue here, but so you see the floating number in the middle of the page, the one with the dollar sign. So that's looking of those 228-ish kids that live in that area. Currently, 178 of them are receiving transportation. So a lot of those students are currently already walking into Winton, walking to Winton Hills. But 178 are the ones that are receiving transportation from us. That is either, all of these would be yellow bus. So I want to be very clear on one thing, because we did do this analysis. I know it's something we're really excited we wanted to be able to see. But we have a couple things going on in transportation, as the committee members are aware. We have, the formative assessment that's going on, doing a rather deep dive into all of our transportation, the various systems and processes there. We also have an accounting audit going on that's looking at the invoices coming through a year-long period for our transportation so that we can better align the exact costs for which years they belong into. So giving a real estimate as to what the transportation impact is difficult in a dollar figure.
Right.
So what we've done, and again, this is very rough, so I just want to be very, make sure everybody understands.
You're not going to go to court and say these
Right,
numbers. Okay.
So basically what we did was we took the total cost of transportation. Like for our yellow bus, the total that we pay out for yellow bus and the total we pay for Metro, divided that by the number of students that are receiving service. So it's a very baseline number. It doesn't account for the difference in cost for a student with a disability versus non, with a longer route versus a shorter route. So are we good? We get it? Like these are really rough numbers? So basically that breaks down to approximately a $2,000 per student cost for yellow bus and a $326 cost for Metro, if we just look at it at that very base level. So then if we compare that to the 178 students here, that if we were to find a way to make the capacity at Winton Hills, we did not need to transport those, you're talking roughly a $360,000 difference in transportation.
Even roughly.
Letting that settle in for a second.
Yeah. Well, I just want you to repeat that one more time. Or,
You said.
you said.
So do the whole thing.
Yeah, which,
I got you.
and do it in Spanish or Hungarian.
No, I got you. I just want to. What I heard you say, this is raw data. Nothing has been disaggregated, and I get it. That with all of transportation lumped together, Yellow and Metro, did you say it averages to a $2,000 cost per student for Yellow?
Roughly, yes.
And then a $3,000 cost per student for Metro?
No, 326.
326. Okay.
These were all yellow.
But yes,
Right,
these
right.
would actually all be yellow.
Right. Okay. I understand. And
19.
then I want to go back just because this example is here. If we were to look at this example with regard to Pleasant Hill, 228 kids, or roughly 200 students, are currently going to Pleasant Hill that live in the Winton Hills boundary and could walk.
That is correct.
However, there's only 93 spaces available, so they wouldn't be able to fit there, even if we were to put them all in their neighborhood school. They couldn't fit.
Correct.
And so that and 178 of the 228 are receiving transportation for us.
Correct.
To be bused from Winton Hills, where they could walk, to Pleasant Hill.
So are they at Pleasant Hill that should be at 100?
I was going to ask that. That was kind of what I was going to ask. But let me go to my colleagues first.
Yeah, I apologize for being late, but so the numbers that you're quoting are you're doing a different math. You're doing a math based on what he's telling you, so it's not documented here. That's why I'm not saying.
Well, I just wrote down what he said, 2,000.
Oh, okay. So it's what he said. It's not.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all. I'm trying to follow.
Well, repeat your number about the number. You said 228. Where'd that come from?
He said there are 228 kids that currently live in the green, live in the Garden Ridge or the Winton Terrace.
Sorry, maybe 227. The 58 in the from the Garden View, Garden Hill at the top, the little chart, there are 58 students, and from the under the Pleasant Hill column, there's the 58 students. Then in the bottom in Winton Terrace, there are 159. Brought my glasses.
Okay.
So 227. Sorry.
227.
And those are kids that live in the Woodland Hills, attend its boundary, but attend Pleasant Hill.
Correct.
Yes.
If you look at the map, those literally are the students living within the blue contained areas on the maps specifically.
Okay, but you're not making any kind of recommendations, you're just sharing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
No,
we're
no,
just
no.
sharing
Right.
the
Yeah,
data.
we've
We don't
talked
do the
about
R
what
word.
So
we're looking at. What would the impact be for some of the decisions or considerations we've talked about?
there was a data point that I think is missing that I used to do these boundary plannings back in the day. Is a racial balance of those dots.
Oh, yeah, that was
Okay.
negative. This part for these two, it is basic. We'll get to some more of that on ones that we've talked more about. This is ones that we've had more discussion on considerations of the boundary not relevant to demographics.
And I just wanted us to pause right here. There's a lot we're missing, but I wanted everybody to comment on this pause.
Yeah, if I could, first of all, on the racial balance, legally and illegally or whatever, what are we allowed to do? And now mostly the issue is economic disadvantage issues as to, that would be good to see. But again, there's not going to be a great deal of diversity about that, unfortunately. But this is why I always say I think this is also ultimately going to lead to a bond issue, very frankly, because, and also a real understanding of what the city's plan for these neighborhoods is. Because it's my understanding that the Metropolitan Housing Authority has been changing significantly what is planned for Winton Hills and Garden and the whole, what used to be along the Winesty corridor. So there, I would add that we have to become very familiar with what these neighborhoods are in planning, both the city and the federal government and whoever else. But also, it would seem if Winton Hills isn't changing, or if that housing complex doesn't change, we would have to be adding to Winton Hills Academy in order to make it possible that all of those kids within the Winton Hills Academy neighborhood would be able to go to that school. Yeah.
Are you gonna do that?
Do what?
You're gonna add to the building?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You have to be making a list of how you have to add or subtract or merge, because this is a facilities track as well as a understanding the neighborhood track as well. So this is so useful and so helpful. But that's that future.
Does anyone else have any? Board Member Jones?
No.
Anyone else? If you are online and you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and Mr. Wilson will get to you. Okay. So this is just one. Yes, ma'am.
Just
She doesn't have a mic.
available electronically.
Yes, it's available online and on our board doc system that is with the agenda and the invite and everything.
And I want to remind you all, get to a mic so they can hear you online. We want to hear your voice.
If you click the center of that, that'll help pick those up.
There you go. All right.
Oh.
Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Are there other schools like this?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted us to pause right
There's
now
a reason we're spending how many millions of dollars on transport?
because this was kind of one of the more egregious ones that we talked about. And I think we talked about 3 of them, but this is just one. But I wanted to give everybody a pause because it took my breath away. I'm just going to be honest. So,
And this has been on the table for 4 years.
really? Okay.
So you may have to remind me of the third, but if we go to the next page, we'll look at the second.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the second one that was a hot spot of discussion has been Mount Airy and Pleasant Hill along, I believe, North Bend and Hamilton, kind of that barrier or that boundary line through there.
Mhm.
So this is a similar kind of a breakdown there. So a little bit different just based on the nature of the boundary itself. There are much fewer kids. We could adjust it to account for maybe 1 or 2 more, just depending on how we want to capture which side of the road everybody lives on. Especially on North Bend, I think there was 1 more Pleasant Hill student that we could capture if we looked at it. But you're roughly talking along that boundary of 28 students. Of that 28, 10 are going to College Hill, which is not within the boundary of either one. It's the magnet school that's close to there. It's part of that same area. So again, if you look at it from a capacity standpoint, I mean, this one's a little bit less clear in terms of what we're looking for. The discussion's really been around, students who could see Pleasant Hill but are going to Mount Airy. So when we look at that, there's not really a capacity issue at either one. We're looking more at just the number of students receiving transportation. So if we look at the students in that boundary or along that boundary line actually getting transported to Mount Airy, there's only 6. So it's a much smaller impact. Again, these would all be yellow bus students. So we're talking roughly $12,000. That if we were to say we wanted to move those students to being able to walk, you can see again, the Pleasant Hill walking boundary is the green. You can see that all of those students do reside within that walking boundary.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And then another layer to that is the existence of that magnet within College Hill itself, actually in the heart of College Hill, and how well it's enrolled or not enrolled, and whether or not that's one of those schools or one of those neighborhoods too, where if that were not that type of magnet, but instead if we were like one of the things, the middle school concept, when you have 2 schools in the same neighborhood, would it, from an instructional standpoint or other points, does it start to make sense to say, okay, this is truly a primary building in the neighborhood, and then this is a quasi middle school in the neighborhood? And there are a number of our neighborhoods, whether it's Avondale, College Hill, Carthage, Hartwell, downtown, where if we have some concerns, and then that has to be the instructional folks to try to tell us on a behavior and instructional piece, is that a better way to go? Because I know we'd expressed some interest in middle schools in this committee. I think Jen wants to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I just have a question. Since this is the first time I'm seeing these maps, the green area is Pleasant Hill's attendance boundary.
No, the green area is the walking boundary.
For Pleasant Hill.
And
So
what's
where's the
sun?
Pleasant Hill attendance boundary?
So this is a little bit too zoomed in to be able to see the whole thing, but you see the blue line that runs through essentially the whole page, the whole picture. There's so if you look at one of these, the blue line designates an attendance boundary. So it's zoomed in to where you can't see the entire attendance boundary for Pleasant Hill, but the boundary, the blue line running along from North Bend to Hamilton there, that's circled by the blue block.
One, yeah.
So-
That's the separating attendance boundary line, but it's too zoomed in to see the whole thing.
So
Students who are the actual boundary line
Understand.
of the school.
I'm still trying to figure out what the entire blue lines mean. So if this is the outside edge of Pleasant Hill, this is the line for Mount Airy. What's the gray space in between?
That's part of the Mount Airy boundary. So all of the boundaries are not comprised of a single blue line, so to speak. There are segments because we have designated this is part of the boundary, this is part of the boundary, and this is part of the boundary. So there's 3 segments that make up the entire boundary.
Okay.
So the gray area, I think what you're referring to in the middle, is effectively Mount Airy's second boundary, but it's part of the entirety for Mount Airy.
Right. Okay.
So there's part where they overlap.
But not so much
No.
overlap. It's just there's different segments. I think there's,
Well, I'm thinking. Can you show me up there, Jeremy? Because that's the one that we're looking at. So the part that's to the left, the blue line that's to the left of that square, where the rectangle, that is Pleasant Hill's boundary.
No.
So this Pleasant Hill, this section of the blue line.
Okay.
This whole side.
Okay.
This section and this section are both Mount Airy. There
Okay.
is a blue line that separates the two, which is what was driving the question.
Is that
Because
North
there is
Bend?
a Mount Airy boundary part 1 and part 2 from the maps. Because it comprises of 2 segments.
Okay.
What street is that? Do you know? That blue line? Is that
Hamilton?
North
Or is
End?
it Coleraine?
This is Hamilton here.
Is that
Coleraine?
Coleraine?
That is also
Yeah.
Hamilton.
I'm wondering, is that Coleraine?
Coleraine.
Yeah.
Because I can see my house on there.
And I can see your
funny.
grandchildren waving from that house saying,
That's too funny.
we go to college.
Yes, ma'am.
So the other, when we really want to get everything confused, and I don't think you have them, I don't know if you have it on here now, but when we put the neighborhood lines on, because
Right.
the part of that concept that I think is interesting is one of the things we're trying to do is more clearly match the neighborhood schools to the existing Cincinnati and outside the city neighborhoods, to at least at the center of whatever boundary lines we're going to draw. So kind of, it's old school, but that will be kind of interesting, and that's what we did with Cans. And of course, multiple neighborhoods up and down off the hill, but that's going to be interesting too. That will give us some, and I like this. What's the walking distance? Is that the 1 mile?
1 mile.
Mama.
Yeah, and so in some maps you may see it as more of a traditional, like you'll see the school with a circle around it. That's a little prettier, but it doesn't really represent a good.
That's how the bird flies.
A good strong
yeah.
because the elevation, the topology of the map, and everything. The 1 mile is not as easily summarized as just a circle. It's a little more detailed.
Yeah, so remember in this area, Kirby Road was in the smack in the middle of it, and when we had to sell it, we had to redistribute those kids, and so that's why these lines look so crazy.
There's also there are 2 places within this data set to see what Member Bolton was discussing. One, on this map, you can see an example. The white dash lines, those are and I always get tongue-tied saying this, but the recognized authority from the community council of each of the neighborhoods map. So that comprises, that's what the white dash lines are there. You can see the blue for the attendance boundaries, and then the plotting of that specific one is for the schools that are not named after the neighborhood they're located in.
Are there still 54 neighborhood boundaries recognized on that map? 52?
I do not know off the top of my head.
And we have 46 elementary schools.
You can also see for a close-up, again, the last section of this on the individual school profiles, each one has a closer map, right? So this gives you the big picture. On the closer map, each one does include the neighborhood boundary, so you can see exactly which neighborhood it's in on a zoomed up.
Never
the city didn't plot it right. One of the two.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Do we have any questions online, Rob? Okay.
Right, so the next page. This goes to the specific, I think, on the agenda, as well as a question that we've asked in terms of impact from some of the considerations that came out of the program audit. So there was one specific recommendation that had specific attendance boundary and enrollment transportation impacts. There were several that would potentially have indirect impacts from program changes and things that would be much more difficult to represent without surveying people, doing a deeper dive into the data. For this section, this is reflective of the consideration for adding 7th and 8th grade to Ethel Taylor, Frederick Douglass, and South Avondale. So if we look at Ethel Taylor currently, and I'll try and walk through this data. It's a little, the color coding I know kind of makes it a nightmare in some ways. On the left in the chart with the yellow lines, what that is showing essentially is the students who are currently attending one of our other systems, whether that's a Montessori, a Magnet, a qualified entry, but they're attending a school that it would not be impacted by them changing or adding 7th and 8th grade to Ethel Taylor. They would still, we assume, it's predictive, not projection. Meaning we can predict that relatively the same number of kids are likely going to attend a Montessori today and tomorrow. It does not give us a projection to say this is the number of kids who would do it, but we can assume it's predictive of what would happen. So again, like the students going to the one 7th grader going to a me likely would still go to a me even if we added 7th and 8th graders to Ethel Taylor. So that comprises the first chart on the left, which gives us essentially there are 18 students who we would remove from the total, giving us the remaining 75 students that we would expect to attend their neighborhood school at Ethel Taylor if we added 7th and 8th grade. And that's reflected at the top under the blue heading that says enrollment. So their current enrollment is 245. Also there for reference is the capacity and how much they're over or under their current enrollment. So then by changing, making this change, we would expect to see roughly 75 students added to that school through enrollment, bringing their new enrollment to 321, reducing their over/under capacity to 129 seats. In the center section under transportation,
This is for lunch, right?
Nope, this is an ad hoc committee meeting. You're welcome.
was that a stop for a question or?
Chair, those three that you mentioned, I think that was a suggestion from the superintendent from the administration based on the fact that those schools, as you said, were so under-enrolled, there was space there.
Correct.
It wasn't part of the divide that the other schools where there's two in a neighborhood or whatever, but this is where you could fit more kids because they were so under-enrolled.
Correct.
Okay. I was trying to remember where those three came from, but that was an administrative decision,
Yes.
suggestion.
This was also keeping the K through 6, but adding a 7th and 8th grade?
Correct.
Okay, so this was not the dedicated junior high that we
No.
explored. This is just putting 7th and 8th graders back into these buildings.
To these three buildings. Correct.
Okay.
So the center section under transportation essentially breaks down of those students reflected on the left. Of those 75, there are 35 total who are receiving transportation. That once, if we were to add 7th and 8th grade and they were to attend Ethel Taylor under the neighborhood, they would be within the walking distance and again, would not qualify for transportation. So roughly, and I really wish these numbers hadn't just floated out in the middle, but
Well, it certainly
roughly,
makes them
makes them
obvious.
talk.
Yeah.
That it would be roughly $46,000 is what we're paying to transport those again on the very rough number. Then at the bottom, you can see the current ethnicity breakdown of the student population and the reflected change that would occur percent-wise by adding the 7th and 8th grade and assuming that those students would attend there.
So this is, these children will be going by Metro, is that what you're saying?
No, this would be a combination of currently, I don't have the percentages memorized, but it was a certain portion of them were riding yellow and certain are using Metro. But this is the combined total of both. It's not just one or the other. It's the combined total for both.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
So putting,
Just for
keeping the
clarity.
CFO hat on here, you're going to save $46,000 in transportation, but you're going to add $400,000 in teaching costs.
Yeah, that's what we have to figure out.
Okay, just
Wait,
And
hold on.
what's that ad? What does that ad come from?
you're not going to drop 4 teachers from the schools that are coming from because the numbers are too low. So you're going to increase your teaching staff across the district.
Okay, explain further.
So if you look at the sending school of Dater High School, you're only dropping 2 kids. 2 kids isn't going to relieve a teacher from Dater.
I don't think this is going to make a grand change to that point. But if we want to wait until after we look at all three, the fourth slide is a comparison of what the entire change would be if you combined all of them.
Okay.
So again, I don't think it's going to change the math on what you're saying at all, but it might be good to wait to see it at that perspective so you can see that it's not one here. It's 5 from Aiken, 8 from, gives you a little bit better numbers as to what the change would be.
And if you divided the grades within 2 buildings, what would the staff cost be there? You're separating the same staff, I guess, into 2 buildings or relatively.
My first thought is that this, it doesn't seem like it's going to be very easy to do this. Just one of the, like collectively, it seems like we need to almost take this scenario by scenario, because it just has a bigger impact than I thought it would have.
So I was with the district when we got rid of the 7th and 8th graders in the K-8 buildings and put them in the high schools because they needed access to high school accreditation classes and counseling services. So if you're going to put the 7th and 8th graders back in, there's going to be an inequity in what they have access to, including counseling. So somebody will want to add more counselors to elementary buildings.
We need more counselors in the elementary building anyway.
Well, There you go.
Well, to me, it makes sense. That's why I asked about, is this is turning them back into a K through 8,
Right.
which we already figured out didn't work. That's why we moved them in the first place. So I'm interested in the middle school model because if you have a building that is, I don't know if it's going to be 6, 7, 8 or 7, 8 or 7, 8, 9. I don't know, but I feel like why are we going backwards to what we had that we already determined wasn't going to work? What does it look like to reimagine? Do we have data from when we had middle schools?
I'm sure there's records somewhere when we had the middle school. The middle schools went away when I first joined the district, and it was because they were horribly disciplined schools. And I don't remember about their academics, but it was 8 years ago.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, just to kind of add to this part of the discussion, I think as we have progressed through these discussions, I think we realize that all of these changes have huge financial implications. We seem to have focused more on the savings for transportation, and we've not looked at, I think, what you're talking
unintended
about,
consequences.
the unintended consequences. So, and I don't know if there's a need right now to sort of look at that parallel, like what at this point in time, what would that look like? I don't know if that's important for us to do, but I just think it's important to note so that we can continue to talk about it, because I get it. I was looking at it and I was asking, I mean, just sort of talking here, and it's like, you know, if we save $46,000 in transportation, that's good, but it's going to cost us on the other side. So we just need to be aware and sort of stay on top of that as much.
That's all those repercussions.
Yeah, it is.
Intended and unintended. But I can't, the middle school, that predates me in CPS. Think about that. We had junior highs and they failed miserably.
Right.
It just failed.
Yeah.
That
We
was
did have
ugly.
junior high.
What was Schwab? Schwab was the
Schwab was
7th and 8th
in
grade.
junior.
That was 7th and 8th grade, right?
Was it just 9? I thought it was 7.
No, not 9.
9.
Oh, just 7.
7th and 8th.
Charter was 7, 8, 9.
And those, we got rid of those when we did the facilities master plan, and halfway through or done with the facilities master plan, we got rid of the K-8 concept, and through, as Jen said, through the 7th and 8th grade kids into the high schools for those reasons. Plus, in fairness, the elementary teachers and principals frankly didn't want the 7th and 8th graders, especially related to state report cards and everything else.
Well, it's had something to do with the change in high school algebra, or the number of math credits increased to graduate.
I think that followed. I don't know that was the initiating, but yeah, whoever raised the issue, we're going back to I think that was the chair, raised the issue. I thought we were trying to get rid of we're thinking about the K-8 piece or something. Or no, the designated middle school.
Yes.
That's what that's right.
And to be honest with you, the conversation about 7th and 8th graders is still consistent today about them. I don't want to say they're a problem. They're not a problem, but they're just a challenging young little group.
Developmental.
Yes. They need special stuff, which
And
is
they
why
need
I'm thinking.
special teachers who actually love them.
Yes, who can love them and discipline them, and
It's a special breed.
definitely. Do we have any questions online, Rob? Any questions from the audience?
No.
Okay. Does anyone want to comment on what we've seen so far? Our superintendent just came in, and so we want to welcome her to the discussion. And are we ready to move on? Okay.
So, I
Yeah,
mean,
keep going.
two comments that I would add just for,
Superintendent needs a book. Here, use mine.
unfortunately.
The big one? You have a
We'll have a 12-hour.
We're gonna just
I'm out of here.
we're adjusting. Go ahead.
So two things I would add just for the sake of the conversation to just consider is the other side of what we were looking at in some of this from the considerations as this was also relieving some of the capacity issues at the other schools. So this would directly draw down like some of the 7th and 8th grade students from schools that are currently at over capacity by considerable numbers. So there was that side, as well as just I think in reflecting on our previous conversation, we may need to clarify what some of the consensus item was around this, because I thought previously we seemed to have a consensus that we were in support of at looking at doing this from the 7th and 8th. So I just want to make sure that I wasn't going down a path that wasn't what we thought it was.
Well, I think it's still on the table. All of it is an option.
I think it is.
Okay.
I think
It's
we're right
beautiful
on target.
work, Jeremy. You did a good job.
So the next page is Frederick Douglass, and we don't need to spend as much time on each of these. Essentially, you can see the same breakdown of the students, what we would expect the increase to be if we converted them to include the 7th and 8th grade, followed by South Avondale and the associated changes. And then on page 15 is where we get to the totality of looking across, if we were to make the changes at all three of those schools, what the overall impact would be at all of the schools that would be impacted. So you can see, like from Aiken High School, if we look at Ethel Taylor, 7th and 8th grade, you would have 4 7th graders, 8 8th graders. From Frederick Douglass, 1 and 1. South Avondale, 4 and 3. So the numbers do add up more than, that's why I was saying we may want to look at this in respect to looking at how many teachers that this could be a shift, because you're talking about a negative 21 total from Aiken High School alone. So you're seeing a total net loss, shift of their enrollment to these other 3 schools of 21 students, which you can see would give Aiken's new enrollment and their new utilization, unfortunately, would still be 121%. So it's not resolving the problem, but it is a 2.2% decrease over what they currently have. So there is a net gain there, or there is a small gain there as to reducing their overcapacity problems currently. So it's part of the equation. The same, if you go down the list, you can see essentially Ethel Taylor, the total that it would gain and from where, and then you can go down to Dater High School, how many would come from there to contribute to the new enrollment at the 7th and 8th in each of those schools. So ultimately, you're talking about 232 students that would be represented in a shift from the schools currently where they would, again, predictive, assuming we would have grandfather for the current students, but as a predictive model for the future, you would see about a 232 enrollment shift of those students.
Predictably.
And so that also speaks to the issue of high schools of choice versus high schools that have boundaries.
It does.
Okay, just so we keep that in mind as the big change.
Anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
We had only talked about having one K through 8 finish every year. No, across the board.
We actually only really talked about the middle school piece. We talked one east side, whatever we did to the east side, we did to the west side at the same time. Yes, ma'am.
And currently we have a K-8 system on the west and a K-8 system in the middle, or the center, or central, and we don't have a K-8 on the east side, which is what we had talked about, I think, J.P. Parker. Right? Then that would, so that's the 111 that you were thinking of too. But yeah, that designated middle school. I don't
So how are
know.
those schools, those two that are?
Well, our west side is what, Euler?
Our west side is
I'm sorry, not
Sailor
Euler.
Park.
Sailor Park. Well, we can look at the data, but, and
Yeah,
Roberts is the.
yeah, all the international are they
Okay.
K-8? Okay.
So all of our internationals are K-8. And then, what was the other one?
Sailor Park, Hartwell.
Yeah, I guess.
Hartwell is actually third grade. It's not quite K.
Yeah, it is. It does break down.
Well, yeah, because their kids
the
are
little
over in
people.
Carthage,
Yep.
so that's really one.
Real estate agent, I just had a conversation
Oh, I'm gonna
yesterday.
interrupt
Oh,
you for a
sorry.
second. And we do have people online that can't hear you.
You got it.
Make sure you turn your microphone. Thank you so much.
I'm a real estate agent. I had a conversation who wants to stay in CPS and who does not understand the school system whatsoever. And I told her that I would help her because I sit in meetings like this. But I think part of the problem with CPS is we have made it so confusing.
Yeah,
And so convoluted to just satisfy whatever we're satisfying. Just on that note, it is literally a giant part of what I do in my job, just helping people understand where their kid could go. And now with the corridor thing, that was a new thing that I talked to her about. So I don't fully understand if I move her to the west, does she even have an option to send her child to Central or East, or are those out all the way?
Hmm.
And I told her I didn't know that. How strict that was going to be in the future.
It's like,
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
That speaks to messaging, which is what we need to work on, in marketing. I'm writing this down.
what continues to be citywide, what continues to be exclusive, what continues to be east-west draw.
And there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, I get those questions, and I'm sitting here thinking about trying to process what you said, and I was like, God, there are many more questions right now about all of this than there are answers, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Okay. Any questions, Rob?
I do have one. We do have one. We have one question from the NAACP. I teach in middle year schools. Hello. Would you be interested in hearing a brief overview of different instructional models for middle years? That's something they'd be interested in. Would like to listen.
For the future? Or for now?
In the future.
For the future?
I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. What do you?
Yeah, add to the agenda next month or something.
Yes, to answer that
You
question.
could write
Sure.
into the chat or two, just to,
Sure. Okay.
or he, I don't know.
Absolutely. Share the resource. Any other questions? Superintendent Wright, do you have any comments about what we've heard so far? This is the K through 8 adjustment of Ethel Taylor, South Avondale, and Frederick Douglass.
I don't. I would like to applaud the team for the work that has really been put into this information. As I shared during our last meeting, we have spent a lot of time talking about this and trying to make sure that we're giving the resources that are necessary to help the board make some recommendations about where we move forward. So I think that there is a alignment with at least what we understand the case to be, and I think we're poised to really make some decisions that, while maybe not something that we would move into next school year collectively, putting us in a direction where moving forward we're really able to address some of the major concerns that we have or areas that we need more in.
Yes, ma'am.
I would love to know the advantages or disadvantages from a parent perspective or a community, probably parent perspective, at K through 8 versus K through 6. What do the kids get or not get?
So I think one, so there are a few things. One is the ability to know that you don't have an additional transition, so that the transition takes the student to a point that they are truly a high school student, because students enter into a high school cohort at 9th grade, not at 7th grade. And so that starts truly their high school career. So that's one benefit. I think it gives more opportunity for families that have children that are in a closer age range together to be in the same place. So they are, again, it's not the transition period that happens. I do think that in several experiences that I've seen, you do have to do some of the same work with elementary schools that were K-6 that moved to K-8 as you would do with the high schools that are 7-12, because if they've not had experiences with 7th and 8th grade students previously, the way that it seems to work best is have it as a grow into model. So what happens is students that are already in your school as 6th graders move up as your 7th graders and then move up as your 8th graders. So it really begins to get the students connected to the expectations overall of the school. So those would be a few advantages that I've actually seen and experienced. But I do think that you still have the same, regardless of where the bodies are. The middle-aged child is a middle-aged child. And so you still have to work with some of those same, there's some of the same, the things that you would work with them if they were in a standalone building by themselves. You still have to work with some of the same things.
Standalone building by themselves. So, but I'm going to hear horror stories about 7th grade experiences at Walnut that, it's just so traumatic for some kids.
Yeah, it's I think if we, we have been in the environment where seventh grade is in high school for a period of time. So I don't know how many students at this point, many of them as sixth graders, they look forward, if they've not been in a K-8 environment, they look forward to selecting where they're going for a high school, and parents are terrified because it's like, that's such a big step for them to make. So I would say, we could poll students and ask students what their experiences were, but because this is the system that many of them know, what it's really advantageous for us to do is look at some of the other data that we have around panorama data, much like the question that you asked and when we were in Cal. And I know we have a long acronym, but Cal is just what I'll say now. When we were talking about academic achievement data, and to slice the data where you're looking at, okay, this is the data across grades, but now let's look at it across schools. So do you see something different in the data for students that are in a K-8 environment or in a 7-12 environment? So I think when we look at our panorama data, that would be a place for us to look at a cross section as well. Do we see something different in terms of responses from students that are in a K-8 environment versus those that are in a 7-12 environment? So it could be a next step for us.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I follow up on Superintendent? I recall when we had the My Tomorrow committee or the high school initiative piece, there was always this worry that having a sixth grader or a family with a sixth grader have to make a choice about the high school that early. It was one of the reasons people liked the 7th and 8th, I think. But with that, it was also, do you provide the opportunity for kids to choose twice was even one of the solutions or one of the suggestions in the My Tomorrow group, because if you're doing the 6th, and it really pertained more to career tech than it did necessarily the college prep piece, because choosing which school because of where the programs were, and maybe the more we do that, that's another issue, I think.
So when we moved into the high schools of choice, we had the Gates grant that helped us do that. The original intent was to have a 9 and 10 academy, and then they chose where they wanted to be for their career. Yeah. We just got away from that because they started wanting them to take at 9th grade the specialty classes, and so it just got really muddied. But during the My Tomorrow initiative, it was the same. That was the last time they changed high school graduation. We started having 8th graders take Algebra 1. Have we quit doing that?
Yeah. We do have some 8th graders that take Algebra 1, and I do anticipate in the years to come, in terms of thinking about acceleration, we'll have more.
So the trouble was getting the high school accredited. The trouble was getting the high school accredited teacher down to the K-8 building to offer that class.
Makes sense. I'll just share from a parent I actually taught when 10th graders, when we had 7th grade and 8th graders in the buildings. Part of the challenge was that we tried to keep, and I was at Withrow, and we tried to keep them separate. So the 7th and 8th graders were in the basement, and they really are a distraction. The older kids, and I was just at Aiken recently, and asked the older kids how did they like having the junior high in the buildings, and they don't, because they look at them as babies, and they see that there are challenges with them. Like, they don't listen. This is what they said. They don't listen. They're distractive. They expressed that it's a distraction as a senior high student. And when you ask some of the 7th and 8th graders, they were, because they were kept in the basement, we're always in the basement. And so I think that is a challenging age. And I personally think that they need their own space. They need teachers who kind of like that age range, and it's not a punishment. They also have different social emotional needs that I think they need to have a building where everybody's going through the same thing and everying is consistent. Yeah, you can just hose it down one time, and then, because I think the intention was to try to keep them separate for lunches even. And when you think about it, you don't want to have a 17-year-old having lunch with a 7th grader. I mean, logistically, it just seemed to be very challenging.
They're like older toddlers. They're testing, and they're, change, their bodies are changing.
They are, and they were almost too big for the K buildings, K through 6
Yeah.
buildings, because they're the big ones on campus. They've been there for many of them for some years, and so it seems, because I was teaching at South Avondale there, and they had K through 8, and they were a challenge there. So they seem to be kind of like the odd men out, and that they just need a lot. Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not going to use the word consensus, but I think that there's some sort of agreement emerging of a preference more for dedicated middle school effort than necessarily returning and having more K-8s. The reason I'm mentioning that, though, is because our high schools, most of them are pretty full. That's an issue. Our preschool numbers are great, and our high school numbers are, at least from our building standpoint, are better than many of our elementary. So you want to try to relieve some of that space issue, like you mentioned about Aiken. But it's this is at least the 4th meeting where we have found a way to work our way back to dedicated middle schools. So I don't know.
And I would almost add, and I agree with the fact that we have come back to this conversation several times. I would almost add that, whether we call it middle or whether we call it junior high, because what happens even, as a former middle school principal, when you had the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we have the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students in the building. You kind of get the same kind of thing. Like there is a difference in a 6th grader and a 7th grader. Mm-hmm. And so in the building, you would really work to keep the 6th graders separated from the 7th and 8th graders. So it'd be challenging for me to think about in a high school how you really truly separate, and keep them separated. And in many instances, trying to keep them separated when they're trying to be where the big kids are, right? Or they're trying to be where the high school students are. So I think there may be some opportunity to think about even 7th and 8th grade centers or 7th and 8th grade academies as a possibility as well, and something to think through. I think 6th, 7th, and 8th works. But I think the 9th grade is tough in the junior high or in the middle school concept, because that's where the graduation cohort starts. And so maintaining them at the high school is really, really important. So I think we're open to really having discussions around configurations and what those configurations look like. But I do think that it would give us some breathing space at some of our high schools where they're really bursting at the seams.
Any comments online, Rob?
Our guest from the NAACP is Jennifer Myrie. Mm-hmm. She said, would individual board members also be selected to shepherd individual zones or communities, north, south, east, west, to streamline communication support?
Can you repeat that for me?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Also, would individual board members be selected to shepherd individual zones, communities, north, south, east, west, streamline communications and support? So it sounds like almost a representation of
An answer.
communities as you draw lines.
No.
I was gonna say I don't think so.
know that I even understand.
Yeah,
District.
Oh, okay.
Districts?
That you would
School
represent
board
a quarter and be
district.
that
Oh.
communication.
Oh,
No.
Board members?
Yes.
Oh, no.
I don't think that if I understand the question correctly, would an individual board member be responsible for specific areas?
No.
No. That I know
But
of.
I'm
I think
curious
we're,
about the thinking about it. I
Yeah.
don't know if I fully understand. Maybe that's not what to say. I don't know.
so,
Is she online?
so, Ms. Myrie, do you want to ask your question? If you want to ask your question, you can unmute, right? Okay. Okay, so, Jeremy, keep
ready?
going. Yeah, we're ready.
And just to kind of keep us aligned, I believe that closes out agenda item number 4.
I think so.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
the agenda.
And, and we're getting
we do
close
have
enough.
one. I was paying attention.
No, you're doing well. I was going to say it sounds a little finance where I can't manage a meeting very well.
We're close to
You
finishing
got it.
out 2,
Yes.
and now
Yes.
we're going to talk about 3.
Yes,
Just kind of keep us in a line. Keep us
Okay.
aligned.
I got you.
So we've talked a lot about, and we've seen this list before. If you look at page 16 in the packet, the list of schools. I really got to change the name of this. The non-neighborhood name schools, or probably more appropriately to say schools not named for the neighborhood they're located in, might be easier. So we've had this list before, so it's provided again. The new addition is on the next page, which provides a district level map that shows both the attendance boundaries of those schools, where those schools are located, and then the neighborhood boundary lines that overlap with those. You can see the larger copy on the wall to the front.
You were saying, are we supposed to be able to read that?
That one did come out a little rough because it's, again, when we try to zoom out to get the entire district, it makes it very difficult to read.
You have to zoom it up now.
Again, I would probably refer, if you want any level of detail, to the school profiles in the back. Those are the zoomed in pictures of each of those schools. So this provides the list in a very high level view, but if you really want to be able to see the details, you want to go to the school profiles in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so non-neighborhood named N3, non-neighborhood named schools. Do committee members have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so on this one, help me remember kind of what was our question or concern or thought about this. That all schools will be named after the neighborhood? Or if that's or what is the policy state currently?
Yeah, I think the fact that even though these, we have several of our schools obviously on this list that are actually named for the neighborhoods, hopefully that they're in, who knows. But also, we also have neighborhood schools programmatically that are neighborhood schools, but they're not named for the neighborhood. So people don't necessarily associate them as being neighborhood schools. They think they might, especially with the Vision 2020 thing that we went through, it got very confusing. But the reality is when you put all these schools there, you have a message that could almost say that almost every one of the neighborhoods in the district has a neighborhood school.
Okay, so is the thought of this committee, and I know we haven't decided that, but is the thought that if in fact it is a true neighborhood school, that it should be named in the neighborhood?
No, but not necessarily, because we love all the names and what have you. But it's the idea that that's your cohort of neighborhood schools and should be identified as neighborhood schools when we think about them. But it's been suggested by somebody too that you have Taylor and Millvale, or you could do that if you wanted to do that. But it's more of us understanding that we have that many neighborhood schools, and we should be messaging that we have that many neighborhood schools and walking and whatever transportation.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think this has come up several times, but in the most recent conversation, I believe it was in relation to the marketing. It was primarily in our discussion around, we wanted to make sure that we were marketing the committee had discussed that there was an interest in making sure to be marketing these neighborhood schools despite not having a neighborhood name necessarily, just as neighborhood schools, as equal as the schools that are, et cetera. That last piece was really around the marketing.
You're right. It was about messaging. It was marketing.
Okay.
I see. And if you look at the list, Chase School is on Chase. Is it on Chase? It's on Chase.
Yeah.
So, I
Chase
can
Avenue,
see. And then John P. Parker is named after someone.
Taylor used to be Millville.
Right. The history is there.
Yeah, and Hayes and Porter were two schools that merged
Together.
Hayes were Hayes, and then there was
Just two different people.
That's right.
Yep.
The Taft Elementary is the birthplace.
So when you're talking about marketing, are we suggesting Kilgore School in Mount Lookout? I mean, what do we?
You could.
Why is this an issue? In that John P. Parker in Madisonville, are we just saying that we need to identify the neighborhoods that are there for the school? That the schools.
I get where you're going, and I think we need to. Lord, I lost my train of thought. It's that kind of day. I think this is going to require a little more work because I think the marketing piece is going to come after all of this. I get your point. Yeah. We want to emphasize and talk about what our schools look like, where they are, and all that, and how we do that. I think
and lessen some of that confusion.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. From a real estate perspective,
right?
Aaron, would that help your clients? if it were
Yeah,
identified in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Especially for ones that, yeah.
It's up
Yeah,
there.
I do think, there are just ones that you just don't know where they are even. Like Pleasant Hill is in College
Sort of
Hill.
CPS
Like
thing.
there's a couple that are just a little, I get the ones named after people, but some of them are just like, what is?
I get it. And I do think, I think this is important, but I do agree with you that this is like stage 2.
Yeah.
This is not
exactly.
stage 1 in my
That's-
mind. I'm not
that's
going
what
to go down
yeah.
this rabbit hole, but I get it. Get it.
Yeah. But we're clear about the point that it is certainly about marketing, how we marketing. If we decide to do something like change the names or whatever, that's certainly a policy implication.
Could I also add, it would help, it's sort of like when we did preschool promise, where one of the things that was, that we did with preschool promise was that we were trying to get rid of the preschool deserts. And that's why one of the reasons we teamed up with the private providers. If we think in terms of all these neighborhoods, is there any place, sort of like the internet connection with Cincinnati Bell when we were in the midst of COVID, what neighborhoods have we forgotten? What neighborhoods are we not in? Are there gaps? Is there a neighborhood? I mean, is every kid in our district able to, or most of them, walk to a school? I mean, so I think there's a geography piece of it, but I do think the marketing is the one, if that would make more sense.
Yes.
Quick note, I don't want to make this more complicated than it already is, and we don't want to go down too deep of rabbit holes, but something that we, with the Community Learning Center Institute, and I think community learning centers in general, with the policy that all CPS schools are community learning centers, I think the question of what do you know, a lot of the times I'll say Euler School is the National Community Learning Center model, and then we'll say Euler Community Learning Center, but then CPS staff say Euler School. And I think the question around marketing again of like the neighborhood school and then a community learning center, and I mean, obviously the name of the school can't be super long, but I think just when you're thinking about marketing in schools and what we want to really highlight, I think the community learning center model is obviously really important, but that can get confusing to describe of like, this is a community learning center at Euler School, that means this. It would be, in a perfect world, if I had a magic wand, obviously I'm not, I don't, but it'd be Euler Community Learning Center, and that's just what it would be called, and that's what everyone would call it, and it wouldn't be different. I think Roberts Academy is the same way, right? We say Roberts Academy. Roberts Academy used to be a high-day school, and so that gets confusing because people will think about that. But then Roberts Academy, Community Learning Center, I just, you know, when you're thinking about marketing, how do you integrate community learning center models, but, you know, and include the neighborhood and include the history and all that.
That's a good point. And honestly, I'm glad you said that because I didn't think about that. So the Community Learning Center takes the full name of the school.
Yeah, and it can get, you know, like Academy of World Languages Community Learning Center. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what it is. But I think, but most of the time it's just AWL, right? Like that's the marketing of it is we say AWL. And so, and then Mount Airy School is Mount Airy School. It's also a community learning center. What's the best way to kind of integrate that in and just have the narrative be consistent, right?
Yeah,
I think that's what's.
It's a good point.
When you're talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
So Jeremy is actually covering this meeting for me today. I just wanted to come in just to make sure that there were not questions that were for me that was direct that I could address before I stepped out. But it seems like Jeremy has it all under control, and I am pleased with that. So I just wanted to share that if there are questions for me, I'll be here for a few more minutes to answer those questions, and then Jeremy will close out the meeting for me.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions specifically for the superintendent? We can put you on the agenda for next month, for sure. Any questions online? Rob? Okay. You look like you wanted to say something.
No, I just think that, again, going back to the audit and how the audit, in the instructional audit, program audit influences us, I think that's something we want to revisit next month. Too, just to your point, I know it's on the agenda here too,
Yeah.
but that and that whole grade band piece would be interesting. And I know Jen has ideas too about the costs of these different kinds of schools that we have. Yeah, so.
And the only other thing, Jeremy, just to pause for 1 second, because we talked about those two schools, Winton Hills, Pleasant Hill, and then Mount Airy and Pleasant Hill. It's a mouthful. But I think we did have some other concerns about other schools. I know Silverton had some questions, and I know what's Pleasant Ridge. I feel like you all had some questions too. So just as a small break, and I think this falls under the audit, while we have the superintendent here, is really why I want to ask this question. Can we look at those two and how we entered into a discussion? It was a good discussion. We should have recorded it, about the impact of transportation on our recently converted non-magnet schools. Am I saying that right? How we had that conversation? So, okay, I'm checking myself. Like, okay, so we talked about Silverton, and we talked specifically about how we changed the designation of that school and the impact that can have on their future enrollment, because we make a decision today with regard to transportation. Does that make sense? Okay. Then Board Member Bolton entered into, we did this same similar thing with cans. And I'm going to let you explain because I don't want to mess it up. I think that's as sure as I got as far as how changing the boundary line for the school, how transportation might impact it in the future in 2 years because we're grandfathering, but we're also changing the boundary line, and that attendance will increase.
Good. It is for
It
cans.
did for cans, and you named another one,
Hyde Park.
Hyde Park. Okay, so Superintendent, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I wanted to get that out because I was trying to. We had a nice discussion, and then Jeremy was like, "Can we record?"
Right.
So,
I think I definitely understand. So, and Silverton has come up, and even though there is a different question that's come up for Pleasant Ridge Montessori,
yeah,
there's a different question that's come up for Pleasant Ridge. So, I think it's something that we look at. So, to the point, once we changed the transportation, so essentially what we did is went back to the alignment that should have been for transportation. And that meant that the school had a magnet designation, but wasn't a magnet school. And so we came back into alignment with that. That was raised in probably one of my first meetings, that it was something that we needed to address while we were addressing the changes in the names, i.e. the PIDEA that was referenced a moment ago. So I think one of the concerns that's come up, because those students are grandfathered, transportation was really limited. It was supposed to be from 4th to 6th grade. We found that there were some different things that were happening there, or the magnet status was 4th to 6th grade. We found there's some different things happening there. I think the concern that's been raised at this point is ultimately that change could impact their enrollment. So I think the response to that is, as we're looking at and having all of this conversation about boundaries, if that's something that we're concerned about, we can also look at what is the shift in the boundary lines for the school to make sure that we are continuing, that we are doing our best to continue to populate the school based on the attendance area and the students that are in that area. So it will be something to have a discussion about. You know, there are sometimes, and I think that cans, there was conversation about the intentionality around, I'm going to say, carving out the neighborhoods, if you will, to make sure that there was the kind of diverse population at the school that the district wanted to have in that community. So I think that that's something for us to talk about as we look at, where we go next with Silverton, because there has not been any discussion, and this is something that we share each time that it's been brought up to us. There's not been any discussion that that I've had, nor have I had with any board members, and I don't think we've brought that up at all in any of our conversations around not planning to have Silverton as a school. And so that was one of the questions, are we planning to close Silverton or, do something else with Silverton? And the response to that has been no. We're just getting the what we have in policy in alignment with what is in practice. So that was just an opportunity to clean up. Now, as we move forward, we continue to look at, is there something additional with programming? If something has to happen with the boundaries for the area to make sure that it's still a vibrant location for the students. The other question that came up with Pleasant Hill Montessori was, and I got this question, I want to say just yesterday, Pleasant Ridge Montessori. But, if there is a plan for the board to make a different decision about the neighborhood Montessori concept for the school. My response to that has been no, because I've heard the celebrations that the board has had around the school being a neighborhood Montessori school. But I think one of the things that was raised was you have, populations that move into the school district, into that attendance boundary area, after second or third grade, that have not had the Montessori experience, and maybe they don't want the Montessori experience, but they're still placed at Pleasant Ridge. And so is that something that's something that we're looking at all? And I think the challenge with that is, we celebrate the fact that once you are in that community, you are in a Montessori environment. And so there is still choice. I mean, students can go different places if they choose to do that, but they would be providing transportation to those places if they choose to do that, if they don't already get transportation. So I think that that's just one for us to clarify, or just, signal, yes, that's what we understand as the board, that we still definitely support the whole school, whole neighborhood, whole community focus at the school, and that we're not looking to, cut off the grades at a certain level if you've not had the Montessori experience previously. And that's not been anything that's been signaled to me by the board. So my response to the question was no, because this is the direction that, it's a celebration for us.
Gotcha. And I'm going to ask you, as our historian, I didn't say longest standing member. I said historian. I tried to dress it up. What have you seen with regard to cans in Hyde Park? Because we had this discussion before, like, okay, if you change the boundary line, that has historically adjusted the attendance, so the numbers go up.
We took back from the Clifton Arts folks our Clifton school. And part of the reason was that a lot of folks believed that Fairview, where you had the sleeping bags and camping out and not having a lottery or whatever, they started to think of that as their neighborhood school. And indeed, you didn't have that was an equity issue. So actually, it was Julie Sellers that she's a Cliftonite by birth and raising, kept saying that the North Central corridor was really underpopulated regarding schools. And we had all that shift between Pleasant Hill and Winton Hills. Anyway, so when we created CANS, and its name is Clifton Area Neighborhood School, and we tried to make them change the name, and they said, no, we're not changing it. But what we did is we had the school there, and we said, okay, we're going to start with all of Clifton, and then we are going to go down to Spring Grove and whatever, Spring Grove, and then, which was Old Winton Place, and we would then also go to the other side of the hill from Clifton into the Clifton Cuff and that area, and so we just merged pretty close, generally, to those neighborhoods that were within a particular distance and not covered. And CANS got settled, and now they're going to have an addition too. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just the way it's playing out. And so that happened. And then for Hyde Park, when that was, because people were worried about putting Hyde Park back in from being the swing space, people said, let's sell it instead because the square can be bigger. We said, we're going to keep it. We're going to have a neighborhood school. But when we looked at the neighborhood boundaries, you didn't have the diversity that you wanted completely. So I know that we edged that boundary, I believe, to the east and down and much more towards Evans and whatever.
Okay.
So that's what you do. You look at the nature of the neighborhood and you kind of merge those boundaries that way. And people were sure. I remember Mrs. Ronan saying nobody's going to be at Hyde Park because they're not going to leave St. Mary. Well, they did, and they're there. But most of the people at Hyde Park, most of the kids are from Mount Lookout because a lot of the Hyde Park kids are, of course, at Kilgore. So it all works out. These two models have worked. And just to go back to the east side with Silverton, when we all talked about Silverton before, those several years ago, we had it in combination with Silverton, J.P. Parker, Woodford, and Pleasant Ridge Montessori. That you have to look at all four of those schools to actually figure out what those boundaries should be. And so that's another. I mean, we even created a map, had Plan B, had Plan A about it, and now we know we probably need some more space on the east side. So,
Yes, ma'am.
If I could add that, I wasn't here for the Hyde Park expansion, but was for the cans. I think in an effort to create a greater diversity and expanding the boundaries, there's also that whole transportation issue, and it is beyond the 1 point whatever we have established now, and so that certainly has to factor into the decisions, is that if in fact we change boundaries, there's going to be those instances where the transportation may be impacted.
And the teachers.
And the teachers.
Because I hadn't thought about the teachers, but the teachers is an issue too. Any questions? Thank you for giving it. I just want people to hear the historical perspective straight from the people who were here and the impacts. So, yes, ma'am.
From what I've heard, Fairview has lost students who have gone to camp because those parents wanted neighborhood school.
Okay. Any questions online, Rob? Any other questions in person?
this.
Okay, so it is 5:32. I just looked up like, dang on it. So we are going to, what should we be working on we got a lot of information, Jeremy. Did you have anything to conclude us, to take us home for the next minute?
There may be one or two things just to note that are in here real quick. If you keep going to the next pages, because these were specific asks.
I apologize. I promise I'll work it out. Yeah. No.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just because they were specific asks, the following maps basically plot the walking boundaries for different systems of the schools, including if there is one for all of the Montessori International boundary for those. Then there's one that has all the walking boundaries for all the rest of the elementary schools. It's the one in the middle over there, so you can see where the overlaps are between the walking boundaries. If you notice, the green are basically the ones that stand alone, the darker or the brighter green. The ones that are overlapping with either a red, a blue, or an orange, or a purple, pink color, those are the ones where you can see where the overlap is. If you look closer, you can actually see through the transparency where the overlaps are to see what that means. The second thing is behind the blue divides. The second blue divide behind it is a very big chart, but it was a specific ask around school of residence, like the feeder pattern for our schools. So if you look at that chart, the columns represent the school. So the first one is Aiken. Beneath that is the list of where all of those kids come from that are currently enrolled at Aiken by the attendance boundary. So at Aiken, you have 16 kids that are currently living within the Bond Hill Academy attendance zone that are attending Aiken. You have 21 that are within the Cairns attendance boundary attending Aiken. You have 31 from Carson's attendance boundary. Except this breaks down every school that way, including the red one. The red ones indicate it's a district-wide enrollment, and the yellow line indicates that's the number of students coming from outside of the district currently at that school. and it breaks down every school. Like I said, it's a pretty big sheet, but just wanted you to be aware it is in there that you were at, because it was a specific ask.
Yeah, I got you. I like it. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Jeremy, because this is
amazing.
great information. I probably have to have you nearby when I go through it, but I do intend to do that.
Translation
So I'm
meeting.
telling you. Jeremy, what does the red mean on pages? So
Anytime.
thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. The middle, two things. For the amount of folks on all three corridors, I think it was Member Jones asked or suggested lifting Walnut and lifting SCPA.
Mhm.
Did if we lifted those, because that really isn't about geography, will we have similar numbers in all three of the corridors? And if I can't do that now, I mean, if we can do that for next time, because I thought that was important.
We can. I mean, the short answer would be removing SCPA from the central would bring it closer to the 10,000 of each.
Yeah.
But then once we were to go to east, wherever it's at, if we were to go to east and remove Walnut, then you're significantly dropping the east back down again below than what the west and central would be.
So that would allow us, if we're looking at not just area, but looking at number of kids available to us, that would allow us to shift some of central over east. Is that what you're saying? Or what? What would we?
I don't think it gives us any conclusion specifically. What we could do is, because right now we're still just looking at alignment on what it could be. I mean, it certainly, if we're just trying to balance the enrollment numbers, then if we took those out, it would definitely require shifting locations, shifting some boundaries into one or the other to rebalance. We may even have to move some from west to central and central to east. Like, we would have to rebalance the whole thing if we took those two schools out. But we can do that.
But the data is there that you could do that.
Absolutely.
It's not like you have to reinvent it.
No, just remake the maps.
I love these.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so it's 5:36, and we didn't get through everything, but we got through so much.
Oh, this is
So
great.
we're going to have our next meeting. Ms. Phyllis, do you know when it is? April 27th at 4 p.m. I tell you, thank you so much to our staff. And welcome back to Pat, because she's back. If you do have any questions for us, feel free to send them in, and we will get them answered and on the topic list for next month. And
Could go over 90 minutes.
I can't go over 90 minutes. I got to
okay.
go. But
You should come to finance committee. You'll get your over.
I was going to say, don't say that out loud, because she will take us to a 2.5-hour
I will
meeting.
go 3 hours.
Woo-wee! I just stopped putting stuff on my calendar, because it's like it starts at 10:45, and it just goes until she's been talking.
That's right.
So we will see you April the 27th at 4 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us, and we are adjourned.